Please welcome Morgan Ortegas of Polaris National Security and our esteemed panel.
Well, hello, Concordia Americas. Hello, Miami. It's good to be back. So welcome to everyone here and everyone online. I'm very excited about this panel. I've been involved with Concordia and the summits for too many years, I can't even remember now. But this is one of my favorites, and it's because two of my really good friends are on this panel. So first, we have Luis Andre Gazatua, who is a very famous lobbyist and businessman here in Miami with the Republican Party. And we have Adrienne Elrod, who has worked in multiple administrations and campaigns, but she is currently the Director of External and Government Affairs for Chips for America. And also, as I was just telling the story backstairs, I was State Department spokesperson in the last administration. One of the reasons I took the job is because Adrienne encouraged me to. So that leads me to say that we are going to talk today about bipartisanship. And yes, I know you all want to roll your eyes and laugh, but it can actually happen in this current environment. And we're going to talk to both of you about your stories of how you get things done, how Republicans and Democrats can come together to solve some of the issues that we're talking about this whole conference at Concordia Americas. I call him Gaz. He's a very good friend of mine. So Gaz, tell us, how are you working on local issues here in Miami? How do you as a Republican work with Democrats? What's your story and model of bipartisan success?
Well, Morgan, thank you for asking me to participate on this panel. Such a pleasure to meet with Adrienne today. We had a nice lunch, a nice bipartisan lunch.
We did.
We had some salad and avocado toast. And a shout out to my friend Saifi Shuf in the crowd. He's a business partner of mine. How do we work? You know, one thing, the structure of our government here in greater Miami, Miami-Dade County benefits us because our elected board members and mayor are nonpartisan seats. Everybody knows where everybody sits on things, though. But they're nonpartisan seats. And we've created an environment here where labor can work very closely with the private sector in a balanced way. We just got a wonderful contract extension for one of my clients who protects the Metro Rail infrastructure. We needed to get a raise for the employees because we couldn't hire employees due to inflation. We had such a challenge. We worked with the union, we took it to the administration, hand in hand. We got the raise, our contract became profitable, our employees are making more money, and they can have a living wage, even though we have a base living wage, but they're over $25 an hour to be armed security guards on the Metro Rail. And we got it passed unanimously. It took a year because that's what legislation takes. But we got it passed unanimously by our Board of County Commissioners, and our mayor, who was here earlier, Daniela Levine-Cava, was our champion. So we have to work together.
Well, it's certainly working in Miami. Adrienne, something really fascinating is you have had similar success with legislation. On the national level, you're working on Chips for America now. This is, when you look at the things that were accomplished in Washington that were done on a bipartisan scale over the last 2 years with both Republicans and Democrats working together, there's not many, but Chips was one of them. Why don't you tell us the story of what happened?
Yeah, so probably, well, at least maybe some of you in this room may remember last summer the CHIPS and Science Act was passed by Congress in a bipartisan manner. And this is the legislation that is basically tasked with getting the semiconductor industry, at least when it comes to leading edge and mature nodes, back here in the United States. And by the way, this legislation would not have passed without Republican support. That is just the bottom line. John Cornyn, Senator from Texas, Frank Lucas from Oklahoma. There were a number of members of Congress, both in the Senate and the House, who were instrumental in getting this passed. And I think this is a prime example of something that knows no political lines. Most people who understand national security and economic security, which I think probably most of you in this room do, know that we cannot rely on China, adversarial countries like China, but also like our friends like Taiwan, for example, to produce these leading edge chips. So my team at Commerce is tasked with, the CHIPS Program Office is tasked with now distributing the $52 billion in funding that the CHIPS and Science Act passed. And that will be a combination of giving out funds to leading edge companies, giving out funds to suppliers, both upstream and downstream, so that we can actually have a reliable ecosystem and also a reliable supply chain here in the United States for semiconductors. So I think that's a prime example of there are a lot of things in Washington that are getting done with both Democrats and Republicans, and this is Exhibit A.
And I think, you know, I have a national security background. I don't know if there's been anything more important from a national security perspective, Adrian, than getting this CHIPS legislation through. A couple people have said this. I don't know who gets the original credit, but essentially, you know, when you look at the auto industry and every industry, I mean, chips are sort of the gasoline of the 1970s. You know, the oil industry and how crucial it is, and so we have to come together on these industries. I always said when I was working on China at the State Department that it's too big for one party to handle. It's an issue that we all have to. You know, one of the interesting things and one of the things I've loved about Concordia over the years is that it brings together government and private sector. So I'm going to ask you both this question and let you answer. And Adrian, why don't we start with you first this time? You have been in the private sector. You are now in government. You've done both. How can the private sector help to decrease polarization and to encourage more bipartisanship in Washington?
Well, not to bring it back to my day job, but I will use that as an example. A number of CEOs, I mean, the private sector was very instrumental in getting this legislation passed. And, you know, you mentioned China. I mean, China is such a uniter of both Democrats and Republicans because it poses such a huge, monumental threat. Businesses know this, government knows this, state and local electeds know this. I mean, it spans the gamut. So I think us being united around, you know, Red China and trying to make sure that we have the systems in place here in the United States to create our own industry, to make sure that the semiconductor industry can be strong and resilient here is really important. I also think industrial policy. I mean, Secretary Raimondo, who's the Commerce Secretary, talks about this a lot. This is the semiconductor industry is reimagining our new industrial policy. We all know that we've lost a lot of manufacturing jobs across the country. That is not a Democratic issue. That is not a Republican issue. That is an economic issue. It's an issue that affects families. So we are looking at this opportunity to really reimagine what the industrial policy for our country looks like. And again, this was passed under the Biden administration, but a lot of the groundwork was frankly laid in the Trump administration. And there is no way that we would have gotten to this point in that we can implement this funding without Republicans and Democrats at the table having conversations.
Same question for you guys. How can the private sector, and you can talk about the local level or the national level, what's the private sector role?
You know, Adrian hit it out of the park. I'll just keep it brief. You know, private sector has to have the discipline to implement the Thanksgiving dinner rule. Don't discuss politics, religion, or now the culture war in the workplace. If people want to fight, they can do it on Twitter in their own time or on break. Don't do it over Slack channels. That's the way you keep us together, you keep us working, keep us focused on our business objectives.
So you're in Miami, Gaz, and this whole conference is obviously focused on the Western Hemisphere and the importance of these relationships. And it's clearly a focus, you know, in Miami, not only for the government, but for the private sector. What more do you think that our national government could do to be reaching out to countries in the Western Hemisphere? The one complaint that I hear often, and it goes for Republican and Democratic administrations, is that we don't pay enough attention to our neighbors.
Well, you know, that's not an area of expertise for me. I would ask you that. You're the expert in foreign policy. But I think the alignment that the vision created in Miami, not necessarily the federal government, by some of our great founders like Maurice Ferré, was to create the connectivities for business, for finance, for trade and logistics with the Americas and the Caribbean. And Miami for a long time became the corporate headquarters for all these South American countries. And we've continued that. Now, amazingly, we've become the corporate headquarters for West Coast and Northeast companies.
For everybody.
But I think the objective of reaching out and really investing in these communities, Mayor Suarez, our dear friend, Saif served him in Venture Miami, in establishing Venture Miami. He understands this, and he's been able to really bring that global presence to Miami. He is our promoter-in-chief, and I think we need to promote what we have here.
You know, and it's interesting about, you know, the mayor, you know, I don't think you would know if he's a Republican or a Democrat because he's putting, if you're just looking to move here in Miami, he's focused on, as you said, on getting investment in Miami, on the economic incentives. Adrian, to take it from a national perspective, what more do you think the government could do to get American businesses to focus on investment in the region?
In this particular region here?
Well, in the Americas as well, yes.
Yeah, well, I mean, we were talking about this at lunch. This may not completely apply to the Americas, but you know, one of the things that we are looking for when it comes to, you know, where the CHIPS funding is going to go is obviously where the academic institutions are that are helping to train the next generation of semiconductor workers, whether you are someone who is at the technician level or whether you are a state-of-the-art engineer that is building the next generation of sophisticated legacy chips and leading-edge chips. So to me, it all kind of starts like, what is the educational, institutional infrastructure that you have in a region? And that oftentimes is what attracts, I think, a lot of businesses. So, you know, when you look at, you know, TSMC, which is a Taiwanese-based semiconductor company, they are building a huge operation near Arizona State University because that's where a lot of the academic professors are that are training this next generation of chips makers. When you look at Intel that's building a fab in Ohio, same thing. Ohio State University has a large engineering school that they've invested in to make sure that they can train that next workforce. So I think a lot of it does come to education, and a lot of it does come to the leaders in these areas that are focused on attracting businesses. I mean, you got to have a business-friendly mayor, and you've got to have business-friendly electeds and leaders in the Americas too.
I tell you what, we do have a very business-friendly community. We're so fortunate to have leadership like Mayor Daniel Levine Cava and Mayor Suarez. This region is just booming. And we're investing in our infrastructure, and the growth is exponential.
Also, who doesn't want to live in Miami? Like,
really?
That's
In
also
August.
a great way.
In August.
Maybe in August.
In August.
Go somewhere else. Not live.
Yeah, I mean, you know, it's interesting too because we were talking about my foreign policy background, and you know, one of the things, and I think you could both speak to this too. One of the things I was just speaking with some of our leaders in the American government who are working on the Western Hemisphere is, you know, and you alluded to this earlier, Adrienne, is the significance that China is placing on the Western Hemisphere. I mean, they are very serious about investing here, and we have the DFC, the Development Finance Corporation, and other entities of the federal government that are focusing on it here. But I think that it's got to be private sector and government working together.
Absolutely.
You know, because if the government says, oh, okay, well now we have to go compete with China and Latin America, we don't have enough resources at the federal level. I mean, the DFC is a fantastic organization, and they're doing a lot of good work, but we don't have the ability to keep up with the amount of money that China is willing to throw around in Belt and Road Initiative, for example. So give me your thoughts on that.
I'm so glad you raised this because I have a couple thoughts on this. Number one, when it comes to the CHIPS funding, the $52 billion that we'll be distributing, Secretary Raimondo has said this time and time again. Anytime she's asked, this is what she said: this is not replacing private capital. If you are a company that is saying, you know, I want to build this fab, but I don't have any money, or I can't get X, Y, and Z, we're not going to give you the funds. This is meant to be sort of that vehicle that gets you to the next level. This is not intended to replace private capital. I think that's very important. You know, and secondly, it is crucial that business be a part of this. When you look at the way China can just throw money at the quote unquote problem, whatever it is, they don't have to go through the same, you know, somewhat complicated legislative process that we go through living under a democracy. We're very lucky, obviously, to live under a democracy, but it does make getting this funding passed much more difficult, whereas China can just throw money at the problem. This $52 billion that we passed as part of the CHIPS and Science Act is a drop in the bucket compared to what China, even what Japan
that's true.
is spending. So it is critically important that business be a part of the conversation, that they be an equal playing partner. Again, the business community was instrumental in getting this bill passed too. And they will be instrumental in making sure that we have a viable semiconductor industry here in the United States.
You know, Gaz, what are you seeing? Do you see it here in Miami, the Chinese influence that we're talking about? Is it a main discussion point here?
Only with regard to concern to national defense, and in the state, there's some conversations about protecting farmland and keeping it owned by Floridians and Americans. That's it.
That's it. That's interesting. So it's so much more focused on who's investing in Miami, and you see that mostly to be a domestic investment from around the country. Or where is it coming from?
Traditionally, it was all Latin America, but now it's all domestic investment. It's absolutely incredible how many folks are relocating to Florida every day.
And are you still seeing Latin American companies moving here? What about the opposite? Are you seeing more companies that are starting to increase their investment in the Americas as well?
We're seeing it both ways. It's really interesting, but a lot of the founders, the ownership of these companies, they maintain the presence in Latin America, but they create their family headquarters here. We have Saif, my friend, and I always talk about how challenging it is to get your kids in the independent and private schools in this community. All the kids are from South America. And now all the kids are from Citadel, but that's a different story.
That's true. It's certainly competitive down here. Let's move forward, guys, into talking about the future. So, Gazatua, you've given examples of how the public and private sector have worked together here locally in Miami and how people put aside partisan differences to get things done here. And the record, I mean, just look at Miami. It speaks for itself. Adrian, you've talked about how at the national level, Republicans and Democrats put aside partisan differences and got this important legislation passed so that we can have, as you said, an industry that is probably going to be, if you had to pick one of the single most important industries to the American economy, it's going to be our ability to manufacture our own chips. So these are amazing examples. I think we've all learned a lot today, but in the short time that we have left, let's talk about the future. What do you think Republicans and Democrats can come together to do at a national level? Is there more legislation like CHIPS that we can maybe see happen in the next year?
I think generally speaking, I actually think there's a lot more bipartisanship that happens in Congress than people realize, but I think generally speaking, issues that affect our economic and national security are just two unifying issues that even if it doesn't feel like we're always on the same page, there is constantly a working cabinet of especially moderate Democrats and moderate Republicans who are coming together to make sure that they are fighting for their communities, that we're fighting for, protecting our national security. So those tend to be the issues. You know, we often hear about the cultural issues. That's sort of what drives the news and what drives people's, Twitter and Instagram accounts. But at the end of the day, I've been not even pleasantly surprised. I've been just thrilled to see how many Republicans have come to the table, working with Secretary of Commerce, my boss, working with the administration on making sure that we're doing this the right way because, not one party has all the answers. And again, when it comes to matters of economic and national security, I think that's where you're going to see a great degree of bipartisanship continue to go forward.
And thank you for that. And Gaz, like I said, you've given some great examples for how Republicans and Democrats have come together in Miami already. What's the future? What can we expect next out of future bipartisan cooperation here locally?
Incredible investments in our infrastructure, incredible investments in resilience, and incredible resistance in battling climate change in order to be able to still live here and not have the king tide effect and disrupt life.
That's an interesting point because that's not something you see Republicans and Democrats agreeing on at the national level.
Senator George Lemieux, United States Senator George Lemieux, he served a term. He told me one time we were sitting down, we were having a chat. He says, Florida Republicans are all environmental Republicans. We enjoy the beach.
Yeah,
we enjoy the weather. We get worried when a hurricane comes up off the coast of Africa, and for 7 days, everybody's nervous. It's kind of like that meme, just checking the Weather Channel every day. Every Florida Republican is an environmental Republican, and that brings us together.
So resilience, climate change investments, infrastructure investments. What else do you think that we could see in the coming year or two in Miami? I mean, it's already grown so much. I don't know how much more successful you guys can be.
Well, we have a couple of Floridians who may be running for president, so that'd be interesting to see too.
Yeah.
So
I don't know how bipartisan that will be, though.
not very.
That might be pretty competitive. Thank you so much. So, and Adrian, I think we have 1 more minute, so I'm gonna use every second that we can to get it out. So like I said, I started off this panel just by talking about what good friends the both of them have been to me. They just met each other today, actually. But Gazatua and I, as Republicans, have worked together for years. Adrian and I worked together on television. And when Matt Swift, one of the co-founders of Concordia, reached out to me and said, I wanted to do a bipartisan panel in Miami, the two of them were at the top of my list. And as I said, I wouldn't have even been State Department spokesperson if it wasn't for my friend friend Adrian, a Democrat.
That is not true.
I don't know if
That
I
is
would have
not
said, my
true.
friend, the Democrat, is the one who, encouraged me and said, this is an amazing job. You have to go do it. You have to go represent America. So I just wanted to encourage all of us watching at home and everyone in this room that, the myth on the national television is that we all hate each other when in fact, listen, we might slug it out over issues of policy that we disagree on. But when we do agree, that's when we can come together, and that's when we can put America first and put our country first and put our citizens first. So thank you so much. I've talked my way into the end of our 20 minutes.
Incredible.
Have a great
Amazing.
weekend. Thank you so much.
Thank you all. And now it's 0.
You're amazing.